Have you ever had a moment where you start your day, get dressed, leave the house, and it's not until you're halfway through with whatever it is that you're doing that you realize, I may have gone a bit overboard? Today's that day for me. Check out my outfit. Beige. 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 I'm a little beige today. I mean, I like the outfit, but wow. I don't think I've ever worn this much of a color that wasn't black ever at one time before. Wild. Anyway, today we're here at Disney Springs and I wanted to sit down and have a quick conversation with you about mobility, specifically ECVs, but we're gonna get into wheelchairs and other mobility devices as well today, at least just briefly. Because here's the thing, you guys have left a lot of ECV related questions recently on the channel, and I totally understand why, especially with some of the changes to the Disability Access Service program. I'm sure that a lot of you are trying to figure out how to navigate Disney moving forward, and you've got a lot of thoughts, and I've got some information to share with you. So first and foremost, let me just start off by giving you a little bit of background. I personally do not use an ECV or any type of mobility device regularly when I'm visiting the parks. Now, I have used an ECV at the parks, specifically when I'm traveling with someone who uses an ECV and they want to walk for a little bit. Sometimes different family members will trade off. So I do have personal experience using an ECV to get it where it needs to go, but it's not a regular thing for me, though I have done a lot of traveling with, as I mentioned, family members who do use an ECV from time to time. So I'm talking from experience, I'm not just talking in hypotheticals here, which I just wanted to lead with so that we all understand where I'm coming from, because I know sometimes it's not always clear. Anyway, like I said, I got a few comments from some of you and I want to go through them today, touch on some of the things that you guys said, and answer some of your questions as well. The first being, I was just wondering if you guys could do some coverage during your regular videos on things that might impact or impede someone in a mobility scooter, aka an ECV. This seems to be something that few, if any, content creators seem to think about, things like second floor rooms with no way up the stairs. Thank you for your help and for your time. First and foremost, thanks for leaving this comment. I always appreciate it, and I always appreciate when people share their wants and needs so that we can make sure that we're talking about that stuff so that you have the information that you want and need. When it comes to mobility and accessibility, we do talk about this whenever it honestly makes sense, which quite frankly doesn't feel like it's a whole lot here at Walt Disney World, because there aren't a lot of limitations on people who use mobility scooters or ECVs here at Walt Disney World. The biggest challenges that you're going to find if you're using an ECV are going to be over at the resorts in the hotel rooms, and this is something that we talk about every time we tour the room. I can tell you that we have talked about this, for example, when we discuss Old Key West. I mentioned things like how if you're on anything other than ground level, they don't have elevators at that resort, or how even if you are on first floor, if you have some sort of accessibility device, there's some lips and stuff to get in and out of the room that might not necessarily work for you. So we do discuss this when it makes sense, but it's not something that we talk about all the time because it's not something you really have to worry about when you're here at Walt Disney World, especially when you're in the parks. From my experience traveling with someone who has mobility needs and navigating all different areas of the parks, I find that Walt Disney World does a pretty good job accommodating those who have mobility needs and might need to use some sort of mobility device. Most queues at Walt Disney World can accommodate that device no problem. There's also areas where you can park that device if you're not going to need it while you're in the queue. And when a queue does not accommodate a mobility device, whether it's an ECV, wheelchair, or even anything like a knee scooter or something more basic than a big device, something a little bit smaller, they do have processes in place to ensure that you can get to where you need to be and you don't have to worry about stairs or anything that might be a problem for you. Now, as a note, because a lot of people are wondering what's going on when it comes to this type of thing with DAS, this is something that you never needed DAS for in terms of let's say Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. This is a great example. This is one of those queues that cannot accommodate mobility devices, and if you wanted to ride, you wouldn't need DAS in order to ride it. If you had a mobility device or you had mobility needs, you would just let a cast member know and they would direct you to a different part of the line. It's around the corner, and then once you get there, you'll then be directed to the ride vehicle. So there are different processes in place to make this work, and we've found this to work fairly well every time that we've needed to use something like this. As I mentioned, family member with an ECV, or that time that Russ needed a wheelchair and then a knee scooter because he injured himself. We were able to manage everything really well. It wasn't a problem. It wasn't even really notable because cast members were very helpful in directing us to where it is that we needed to go. So if you don't hear us mentioning it all that often, it's just because it's not even necessary. So I want to make sure that we have conversations about it every now and again. So thank you for the reminder. It's why we're talking about this today, but it's not necessarily something that needs to be worried about all that much, even with all the scuttlebutt about the changes to DAS, because again, we'll talk about this more some other time, but DAS was never designed specifically for mobility needs. While there is sometimes some crossover there, the intention was to make more queues accessible so that less people needed to use the DAS program. This is a change that happened however long ago, so it's nothing to really get all up in arms about if you really just need a scooter or a wheelchair from time to time because you struggle with walking and all of that. Also, while I'm on the topic of not necessarily needing a mobility device day to day, I just want to make sure that I'm perfectly clear about something, because this always comes up whenever we talk about this type of thing when it comes to ECVs and wheelchairs and other mobility devices. No matter how you're looking at this, whether you're someone who is considering bringing a mobility device or using a mobility device when at Walt Disney World, or if you're someone who's like wagging their finger at people who you don't think need it, it's important to realize that people have different needs day to day, and then when doing things that are relatively extreme, like visiting Walt Disney World. And yes, Walt Disney World is a relatively extreme place to visit, especially if you're the average American who might not necessarily walk 10 to 15 miles a day. Even if you're someone who doesn't necessarily need a tool on a daily basis, you might need that tool when doing certain things, and visiting Walt Disney World might be that thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to be ashamed of. On the flip side, for those who like to wag their finger, I think you're not really in any position to tell people what they should or shouldn't use, what tools may or may not help them, especially if you use tools yourself. Most people who say things like that tend to not be the ones who are walking to their local grocery store. You know, they load up in the car and then they drive there. But yeah, I think that's really important to keep in mind. And you know, if you're wagging your finger, you really have no business doing that. And if you think that this is something that could be helpful and make everyone have a better experience, not only yourself but the rest of your family as well, you know, you're here to have a good time. If you think that this is going to be a tool that'll help you do that, don't be ashamed to utilize that tool, because it is one that is available to you. There are a lot of different routes that you can go. We'll get more into that here in a second, but let me get to the next question. So this one says, my parents are coming with us in January and I think we need 1 or 2 ECVs. We've never had to get one before, so I'm nervous. I just want them to have the best time. Well, first and foremost, you're already on the right track. Just taking the time to look into this and think about it is a good plan. I do recommend ECVs over wheelchairs, mainly because wheelchairs require someone to push them around. ECVs, as long as they're comfortable with driving that ECV around, is a little bit more freedom, and I find that the family members I have who choose an ECV over a wheelchair tend to have a better time. It's less stress, it's less strenuous on the person who otherwise would be pushing them. Now, the second part to this question is, how easy is it to rent them from each park, and does the battery last all day? If you're going the route of renting an ECV from Walt Disney World, it's fairly easy. You just have to show up. I recommend showing up early because there are a limited number of ECVs available at each park. But yeah, just show up early, put in your rental, and you'll be good to go. You'll have access to it all day long. I will say that in my experience, this has never been a problem. Getting there early, I can always get my hands on an ECV, but again, I make sure that I'm getting there early, like rope drop early. Don't wait until later in the day because, like I said, they can run out. It's also helpful to realize that if you're going to be visiting the park later in the day, you know, your parents are going to sleep in or whatever the case, someone can still go to the park and rent those ECVs for you, so you can pay and they'll hold them for you all day long. Just let them know that you're gonna come back later for them. We've had success with this as well. So one of us will go to the park, rent the ECV that we need, and then later in the evening, the family member will come, we'll have that ECV and be charged and ready to go. So I do think that that's a helpful little tidbit, but it still requires you to get there early. Now, in terms of whether or not the battery lasts all day, that's really gonna depend on how you use the ECV and what your day at the park looks like. When we visit Walt Disney World, we tend to visit in the mornings, leave in the afternoons, and come back in the evenings. And during that time, you can turn the ECV back in, tell them that you will be returning later that day, and they'll charge it for you. So they'll put it on charge, and then when you come back later in the day, it will be fully charged for you so that you can have it throughout the evening. I do know that just like with every other battery-powered device, they can run out, especially if we're talking about being in the park all day long at a park like Magic Kingdom. You know, it opens up at like 7 a.m. and it closes at 11. The scooter is not going to last all day long in that case, although Disney is usually really good about being able to swap them out so that they can charge them and give you another scooter. There's a method for that. I haven't used that method as of yet because we don't vacation in that way. But again, it really just depends on your style. If you're going to be parking the scooter, it might last longer. You know, just keep that in mind. It is battery powered, so it may or may not last all day depending on how you choose to use it. Now, with that having been said, I know I'm going to throw something at you that you might not be ready for, but I want to make sure that you know all of the options that are available to you, especially if you're concerned about renting a scooter or maybe getting up early isn't going to work for you. Honestly, if you're renting 2 scooters, this might actually be a better way to go in terms of saving some money, and that is to rent from a third-party company. Now look, this isn't going to work for everybody, especially if you're not staying on property, especially, I mean, there are a number of reasons that this might not work for everybody, but renting a scooter, renting an ECV from Disney is not your only option. There are plenty of third-party companies that you can also go with that will give you a variety of different mobility scooters to choose from. In fact, they have a variety of different mobility devices to choose from. So, you know, we're talking about ECVs today, but if you're someone who's going to need an e-scooter or some other type of device or even a stroller, this might be an option to take a look at versus renting from Disney directly, especially if you might need a little bit of assistance getting around, maybe to and from the buses, to and from the parks, around your resort, whatever the case may be. Now, there are a number of different companies that you can choose from. They're all going to have different price points, but I will say that generally speaking, they tend to be more affordable than renting from Disney. It's also important to realize that if you rent an ECV from Disney, you're not going to have access to it outside the park. So you're going to have to get yourself all the way into the park before you can rent that ECV. The same is true for wheelchairs or strollers as well. And then once you leave for the day, you are going to have to leave that with them. They do have courtesy wheelchairs, so whether you are taking Disney transportation in or if you are driving in and you're going to be making that long trek from the parking lot, they do have wheelchairs that you will have access to on your way in, but you're not going to have anything available to you when you're elsewhere. So again, things like getting around your resort. So I do think that renting from a third-party company can be a good way to go. Like I said, they do have a lot of different options that you can choose from. They have like fans and sunshades and all of these accessories that you can add to your mobility device, your ECV, that'll make things a little bit more pleasant for your trip. Again, this isn't going to work for everyone, especially people who are choosing to drive in, because you're not going to have a way to move that mobility device. But if you're staying on property, you have access to Disney transportation. They do accommodate ECVs and wheelchairs and whatnot, which makes it a great way to go. It can be a little bit more complex when you have multiple ECVs, so it's important to keep that in mind, but generally speaking, Disney transportation can accommodate more than one. And while it can be a little bit of extra work, it can be a little bit of extra time, I totally think that it's worth it, and as long as you're planning accordingly, leaving a little bit early, it's really not that big a deal. Now, when it comes to our personal experience renting mobility devices, we have gone the route of renting from Disney directly as well as going through a third party. And honestly, we've had a lot of success going both routes. Disney's incredibly convenient, especially if you can manage getting to and from the point where you can rent that ECV or wheelchair. It's nice to not have to worry about getting on Disney transportation with an ECV or wheelchair if you don't need to, although like I said, if you know you're going to be using it for however long, it's just so much more convenient to have your own, especially if you're going to need it at the resorts. Also, it can be much more affordable to have your own versus renting one from Disney, which can add up really quickly. But even with the price point aside, it's really nice to have a wider variety of what's available to you when you rent through a third-party company. So you just have to weigh your options and decide what it is that you want to do and how you want to do it. You do have a lot of options that are available to you. You just have to decide which one is right. Now, with so many different options out there to choose from, it can be hard to figure out like where to start your search. And so I want to take a second and reach out to you guys who do have experience in this area. What has your experience been? What companies have you gone to? What did you think about that company? Should someone go with this company? Should someone steer clear? Tell us all about it in a comment down below. In past discussions, you guys have been amazing in providing different options to those who might need them, and so I know that you guys are gonna shine in this area as well. So let me know all your thoughts in a comment down below. Let me know what works for you, what doesn't, what recommendations that you have. I am sure they're going to be so helpful, and we all want to thank you in advance. But I think that's all for now. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope that this answered your question and gave you a little bit of clarity on this, sometimes a little bit stressful, sometimes a little bit confusing topic. If not, don't hesitate to pop any of your questions in the comments down below. We are happy to get back to you. We want to make sure that this is the best vacation possible for you, even when you have some needs that you're not necessarily sure how to accommodate. So, but yeah, that's all for now. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Bye.